Hey everyone, how you guys doing? Welcome to Period Action Day. We're super excited today to be speaking with Miranda Martini. Thank you so much for being here. So just to get started and dive right into it, my name is Amir Abdul. I'm campaign manager here at Period, and we are really excited to be having this talk today. So Miranda, if you could just please introduce yourself, maybe mention your preferred name, your preferred pronouns, and what inspired you to join the fight for menstrual equity.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Amir, first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to talk to you today. So, like Amir stated, my name is Miranda Martini. My preferred name is Miranda, and my pronouns are she and her. And what really inspired me to join the fight for menstrual equity honestly came from a colleague of mine. Um, I work at a company that has a lot to do with body positivity and female empowerment. And one of my bosses, had talked to me about Period and all of the great work that it was doing. And I read up on it about 2 years ago and absolutely thought that this was a fantastic organization that I wanted to get involved with. And especially after hearing people's personal experiences about period equity and sort of the injustices that they faced and period stigma and everything. And even looking back on my own life and the stigma that I've encountered, and I know my friends have also encountered, it really became an issue that was one that I felt like we needed to help out with and get involved with and make sure that it's not something that other people face in the future.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I really appreciate that. And just to mention, Miranda was actually part of National Period Day last year. This year, we're calling it Period Action Day. But last year, she was a part of National Period Day, and she was a speaker at the New York City rally, which was great. So it was great having her then, and it's great having you now. So we appreciate it. So,
Yeah.
often we see like a lot of people when they start to get involved in the menstrual equity space and kind of talking about period poverty, a lot of times we see a lot of barriers are kind of put up, and it's sometimes difficult for people to talk about the issues and things of that nature. So for you, have you faced any challenges, and if so, what challenges have you might have faced as you got involved within the menstrual equity space, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, definitely. So I think probably the biggest challenge I face is probably one that lots of other women face as well. It's just really the uncomfortableness, I would say, of having to talk about your periods. And I know it's a universal thing that every person with female reproductive organs experiences on a monthly basis, but I think it definitely is a taboo subject, and even women have a really difficult time talking about it. So one of the things that I faced was just some of my friends and other people learning that I was doing this work of just feeling uncomfortable. So the way that I really approached that was making sure that I humanized the issue for them. It is an incredibly human issue. It's something that happens, like I said, to everybody with a uterus on a monthly basis. So just really making sure that when you are talking to your friends or your family or anyone that might be uncomfortable with it, just say like, I know this is something that we all go through together, and it's something that's really important to me. And I know sometimes it's uncomfortable and it could be theoretically gross to talk about, but let's just get through it together. And I think that we'll all be better if we banded together about this. And after I took that approach with some of my friends, I definitely noticed more openness to talk about it, less people sort of questioning what period equity really was or what period stigma really was. And then also from a personal perspective, it allowed me actually to realize that I had a medical condition that was very chronic and needed to get fixed. And for full transparency, about 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with endometriosis, which for people that have it, they know that once a month, your body just kind of gets racked when you have your period. You're exhausted, your cramps are incredibly painful. It's really difficult to get anything done and function. And obviously, the condition has varying degrees, but being able to talk about my experience with my period with my friends actually led me to believe and led me to understand that the period I was getting every month wasn't normal. And so I went to a doctor and I got diagnosed and I ended up getting surgery for endometriosis and everything worked out fine. But had I not talked to anyone or had I really not gotten involved and realized that talking about periods and normalizing them was something that was so important, I probably never would have figured out that I actually have an underlying health condition. So I would say for me, just make sure that everyone you're talking to understands that this is a universal thing that everyone goes through, and it's not something that's gross, and it's something we all deal with every month. And then also, if you feel like maybe your periods are abnormal, definitely reach out to a medical professional, because I think that that'll also help, sort of get rid of some of the stigma that you might face in your everyday life.
Yeah, wow, that's great perspective, honestly. And
Yeah.
you kind of talked about how, like, at first it was kind of uncomfortable talking to people. So do you feel like just the stigma around periods in general really, affects people? Because for you, for example, you kind of overcame that stigma and you're just like, all right, I just got to talk about it. And,
Mhm.
it led to where you are today, and it kind of helped you out in the long run. So do you feel like the period stigma is kind of still around? And what was that like for you growing up, in comparison to what you see it kind of is right now around in society?
I definitely think that it's still a thing. The one thing that I have noticed from when I was a child versus now looking at some of the younger siblings of my friends and peers is that Gen Z to me almost feels like just a completely more open generation. They're more open to talking about painful things, and that comes with everything that we've seen going on in our society this year. But there's also more of an openness to talking about racial inequality and gender inequality, and period stigma falls into that. And apologies, I just moved my camera. And also financial inequality and all of that other stuff. I think they're a very aware generation, and I don't think I was when I was younger. And I remember, like, when I first got my period at school, my mom gave me this like little pouch that I could put all my products in, so that if I needed to in the middle of class, like, take it out and go to the bathroom and use it without having to like show everyone what it was. And I remember one of my friends came up to me and she was like, "You had a pouch that you took to the bathroom with you. Like, are you on your period? That's so gross. Like, you're bleeding right now." And I just had to sit, I felt so ashamed because I was like, oh my God, I am. It's so gross. Like, I don't know what's going on. But it's, I've had to come to realize that it's something that everyone goes through. I think I've just seen a lot of changes in the younger siblings of my friends. They're incredibly open to talking about it. And I do believe that it still is a thing. I think everyone gets a little bit shocked the first time they have their period and the first time their friends have their period, and what it all means. But I think the moment we can really start educating people when they're going through puberty, when they're about to get their periods, and let them know, like, this is a very normal thing that everyone goes through, that's when we can really start to, break that stigma right from the beginning. And I do see that starting to happen now.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So, going off of that, obviously period poverty is a crisis that's, you know, swept under the rug quite often.
Mhm.
So when we look at that issue of period poverty, what do you feel has been like the leading cause of an issue like that? Um, just kind of what from what you've seen, I would say. And what are some actions you feel like people could take to kind of take a step forward in combating that issue?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's also a very difficult question to ask because, unfortunately, I don't think that there's one leading issue. I guess if I would have to say there's one leading cause to it, it would be access to period products, for more marginalized groups. But I think understanding that access might be an issue sort of encompasses a much broader and much bigger issue that we all need to face. And I think when you really take a step back and you look at everything that's been going on in the news recently, and sort of everything that's happening in our society, and sort of this societal awakening or reawakening that we've had, I think you really have to look at everything through an intersectional lens. Um, you have to look at the racial justice movement, and you have to understand why people are fighting for justice, why they feel marginalized. And then some of those reasons also lead into, why some people of a certain demographic might be of a lower socioeconomic status, or some people of a certain demographic might not have, access to lots of other things that other people of certain demographics have. So I think there's no one leading cause. I think it's all very intersectional. But I would say probably the main one is access, just really making sure that, in these areas where period products might not be available, or in areas where people are living, below the poverty line or paycheck to paycheck, and having a tax on menstrual products is the determining factor of whether or not they'll actually buy them or are able to buy them. I think really looking at those issues and then understanding how all of that came to be is one of the biggest steps that we can take to fixing everything. Um, Educate yourself and make sure that you understand why the world is the way it is, and look at every single issue that's going on through a lens of intersectionality. And I think that that's the one main thing we can do, to sort of help combat period stigma and then some of the other issues we're facing today.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly it. I love that you brought up intersectionality, and that's so important within this, and since last year, since the last time you actually spoke at the National Peer Day rally in New York last October, a lot has happened.
Yeah.
Oh my God, a lot has happened since then, just in society in general, around the world, within our own organization. Just a lot has been going on. Um, how do you feel like things have changed since then in the last year? Have they? Do you even think maybe they have in regards to menstrual equity or period poverty? Do you think any progress has been made? Whether it's regardless of what it may be, um, within this space.
Yeah, so I think in terms of period equity and period poverty, I think that there actually have been some great strides that have been made. I know New York passed a law that I believe went into effect in January of 2020, where New York was actually the first state that requires the disclosure of ingredients in menstrual products, which I found to be wild that that has never happened before. So, all of these companies now have to disclose what's actually included in their pads and tampons, which I think is incredibly important, especially since they have to disclose that on food, and menstrual products are another thing that quite literally goes into your body. I think, Utah also exempted their tax on menstrual products in December of 2019, which is really great to see. And then Washington state also signed a bill eliminating the tampon tax that went into effect, I believe, in July of this year. So I think those are three instances where, we've really seen some strides with period equity, and hopefully with period poverty as well, just making those products a little bit more accessible. But I would say, I think the overarching trend that I've seen this year, and the thing that really has changed and has honestly been really inspiring, is everyone's commitment to get behind an issue that they are passionate about. I think this year we've seen an outpouring of social activism, not only in the streets through protests, but also on social media. I think a lot of that in part has been driven by, the next generation or younger people. I went to a couple protests myself and definitely noticed that there were a ton of, college age kids, high school age kids, and also children there with their parents. So that was really inspiring for me to see. I think there's also now this just openness and this willingness to learn, which I think was very different from last year. Lots of people are sort of having the veil of normalcy, I think, be removed from their eyes, and they're really starting to look at, how our society functions and other things that are going on in our society and potential injustices. So really making a lot of progress, I think, on the educational front and that want for education as well. So I would definitely say that to me has been the biggest change. But I think in regards to period equity in certain legislation, I think there have been, some small strides, but very good strides made since our rally last year.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's crazy when we think back over like the last 8 or 9 months, or however, or last year, I guess. There's just been, so many heavy things that have just happened, and it's nice to see that within this space, some activists within the space, and people involved here within menstrual equity and the menstrual movement feel that some progress has been made, and like we're taking steps forward, even though they might not be huge steps forward, but they are steps forward, nonetheless. So you know, that's great. And then, to your point, you're talking about how the youth have been super active. Gen Z is just like killing it. They're just out there doing what they do. And so, how important do you feel the youth voice is here to make change, really just in general? And what role do you think they could play in combating issues like period poverty and fighting for menstrual equity?
Yeah, so I feel like this is sort of a cliche term, but I'm going to say it anyway. I definitely feel like the youth is our future. I think that's something every generation says, but in this particular case, just seeing how engaged and active Gen Z is, I wholeheartedly believe that to be true. Um, and I think the ways that everyone can come together, the youth in particular, to combat issues of period poverty, I think they're probably some of the most civically engaged people that I've met. So I think definitely coming together to make sure that you're not only registered to vote, but you're also voting for people that, are advocating for period equity and are advocating for, the overturn of the tampon tax or any, female necessities sort of being taxed at a luxury rate. I would definitely say also the youth is incredibly open to education and to hearing lots of other people's perspectives. So I think in that regards, definitely making sure that we're highlighting lots of different people from lots of different walks of life and how this one issue has affected all of them. I think that's incredibly important as well. But I definitely feel like, the youth definitely has a lot of power to make change. They're so socially engaged, they're so active, and they're one of the most open groups of people that I've encountered in my life. And I think just coming from a mindset of openness and understanding and wanting to learn, that's really how you're able to affect change.
Yeah, no, 100%. They've been super active and very vocal, which is, great to see. I think that's extremely important. So, and you touched a little bit about voting. Um, and that's actually what for us here at Period and working with Period Action Day, that's one of the most important calls to action is we're really asking people to register for, a lot of states already started with the deadlines and we're asking people to go out and vote and make sure that they do that. So to that point, do you have one call to action? If you had one call to action to kind of give the viewers and everyone kind of watching to take, what would that be and why?
Yeah. So I would say, obviously, you should register to vote. But my next call to action, and I think the biggest one, is make sure that you're educating yourself on what each candidate stands for, not only in the presidential election, but also in your local elections as well. And really make sure that you're educating yourself on what issues matter to you. And then make sure that after you've educated yourself, you're then voting for people that, stand up for the issues that matter to you. So I would say, obviously, register to vote and vote. I don't need to be the person to tell you that. I feel like lots of people are telling everyone to do that. So definitely make sure you do that. But I think you really need to educate yourself. And I would call on everyone to educate themselves on the issues they feel the most passionately about, and then make sure that they're voting for people that support those issues.
Yeah, that's so great. That's so important. I think you're right. Just having being involved in political campaigns over the last few years, one of the biggest things I see is people just go out and you know vote for a specific party that they feel they might connect more with without necessarily reading about the person who's running the candidate and what they stand for. So educating themselves is extremely important and understanding who's running on things that you feel best represent you, your friends, your family, and society in general. So that's extremely important. So I'm glad you brought that up. But Miranda, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we kind of log off here? I know we're taking a lot of your time.
Not at all. I'm happy to do this. I would just say, especially with something like changing period stigma, helping with period equity, and trying to eradicate period poverty, these are definitely issues that unfortunately don't work themselves out overnight. But as we have seen, there are steps that are being taken to make sure that these issues are resolved. So I would say be patient, keep working, And eventually, I think you will see the change that you want in the world. We just have to do it one step at a time. And I think that that first step starts with getting involved, which is an amazing thing that Period is doing this day of action. So just keep doing what you're doing. Good stuff will come, but definitely be patient as well.
Yes, Miranda, giving us the hope we need. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here, and it's great having you.
Thank you so much. Well, I have loved every minute of this, and it was great to see you again, Amir, and have a great day of action.